Okay, so the very last thing I want to cover, and I'm going to do this several times throughout the semester, is provide case studies for several different examples of international sport business. And this is the first one I want to get at because a lot of people are interested in the NFL. And so our first case study is about the NFL and its expansion to Europe. And so if we look at international expansion of American football, one of the big ways that it first started was in Europe. And if you know anything about a global sport, we call it American football. We actually call it football, and other people across the globe call it American football because it's not that type of football, right? Football is considered soccer across the globe. And so when we talk about this, which goes back to the first part, or this whole idea that comes from, or theme that comes from this case study, is that the NFL tried to expand, and different people tried to expand American football and just call it football. It's not understanding cultural differences, which is the whole theme of our chapter as well. There are three basic phases, and I'm going to go through each of these phases in a second, in which American football has been not so successfully attempted to expand to Europe. First one is the World League of American Football, the WLAF. Then the NFL tried with the NFL Europe, and then took off the E and made it Europa, made changes in each of these phases. And then I'll finish up today this case study about kind of the changes that we've seen in the NFL. So the first question is, why does American football compete globally? Who do they compete with? And that is essentially rugby and soccer. The past and the current goal of the NFL globally has really just been to try to globalize the brand. But what we've kind of learned throughout this chapter is that the importance of culture, that we can't just take a sport and the way it's being marketed in its domestic market and expand it globally. And so this is what they've tried to do. A little bit of history about American football abroad. The first American football game was a European game at the NATO-based, and it was a tournament of 4 different NATO-based football teams. It played in Italy in 1972. And the first time that we had an international league was actually the AFF, or the American Football Federation. That one was in 1982, and it consisted of teams out of 5 different countries: Finland, Italy, Germany, Austria, and France. And so you'll see some of these same countries come up because of essentially the acceptance of American culture in these countries. So again, it's Finland, Italy, Austria, and France. And then the first time we saw corporate involvement in the football globally was with Budweiser. In 1986, there was a league that was formed in England called the Budweiser League. There's a video that is not a good enough quality to be able to show here, but you could probably Google the Budweiser League in England and find some great video. So, starting first with what the NFL has done, is known as the World League of American Football, the WLAF. If you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, and I would say probably more of a diehard one, you've probably heard of a guy named Tex Schramm. Tex Schramm was the Dallas Cowboys president, and if you are a football fan at all, you probably heard the term Dallas is America's team. Well, Tex Schramm is the person who coined that phrase. Tex Schramm's biggest idea was trying to develop the Cowboys into a premier football team in which everybody thought of as being America's team. He really did also change the way that NFL teams interacted with the media. He wrote his own stories and sent them to newspapers, essentially press releases that were written by the president of the team that the newspaper would then run, because the newspaper wasn't really sending much attention to the team. And so he really changed the game in that. And so he managed a lot of business and the development of the World League of American Football. And it was the first time the NFL tried a developmental league. So in the first league, it was in 1991. So again, these are all after those first couple of attempts in 1972, 1982, and 1986. Our first season of the World League of American Football occurred in 1991. It included 10 teams over 2 different continents. See, here's where it's different. So the World League of American Football essentially took teams in the United States, put them in the same league as those that are, North America and one in Canada, U.S. and one in Canada, so in North America, and then took also teams in Europe and basically combined them into one large league. first thing you're probably thinking of is how can they afford to, in 1991, travel with all these teams across the ocean. That was one of the biggest problems, but we'll get to that in a second. There were 7 teams in North America. 6 of them were in the United States, and 1 was in Canada. And then there were 3 teams in Europe. Those 3 teams were Barcelona, London, and Frankfurt. And you'll kind of see some of those teams stick around as we go throughout these phases. The World League of American Football had a honeymoon effect in Europe. In other words, it's also known in the marketing terms as the novelty effect. It's essentially once a new facility or new product comes out, everybody wants it, everybody wants to see it, and then that effect essentially dies off if it is a fad. And unfortunately, it was. The reason it fell was in the United States. They were competing against the larger league, the NFL, and even in Canada, they're competing against the Canadian Football League. And the teams in the U.S. didn't really have enough attendance. They only had about 10,000 fans per game, and so we really ended before the 1993 season, which was essentially 1991 and 1992 seasons. The other reason that the first phase went wrong was because they didn't really do much education about Europeans. Europeans knew nothing about the sport, and they didn't do much to try to fix that. One thing that we'll mention throughout the semester is this idea of grassroots marketing. It's essentially encouraging participation many times at the youth level. We'll talk a little bit more about grassroots marketing in Europe, some things they've done. But again, you're really just providing some opportunity for youth to play the sport so that when they grow up, they're more likely to be fans of the sport and therefore watch it, which affects your attendance. Another thing that was a problem is this idea of nationalism. We'll talk more about it later, but nationalism essentially is the belief that your country is greater than all other countries, which is great when you talk about the Olympic Games and you're supporting your team. The problem is not everything is about the United States. And so essentially what happened was the European teams were struggling because the idea of Americanism, right, American football being the best ever, and inserting that into a culture that may not believe that, you start to have problems with people who have different belief systems about the country and between the countries. So another thing, sorry, I missed that. There's your definition. Nationalism is a belief that your country is greater than all other countries. But what went wrong besides attendance, the idea if it's not broke, don't fix it, is a problem. American NFL marketers use the same marketing tactics that they used in the domestic market in the United States. And so what happens when you don't know it's not broken is, well, you oftentimes fail. Also, they really were replicating the U.S. game days. So in other words, they had tailgates, but Europeans don't really know what tailgating is. And so the idea of the marketing tactics used in the World League of American Football had problems. There are also perceptions or negative perceptions of imperialism, which is defined as the establishing dominance by imposing one's culture upon another. So in other words, we were just forcing our way upon the other culture, and the idea is my way is the highway attitude for a lot of American sports culture didn't work in Europe. And so there were a lot of problems there. So it failed. 1993, we're done. But the NFL said, you know what? We want to take another stab at it. We need a developmental league. There's still a problem. We're really not getting this developmental league that other leagues have. That is minor league baseball for MLB, the D League for the NBA. And they said, we're going to try it again. And there's 2 reasons we're going to try it again. We're going to try to increase our sales. We're trying to increase our merchandise and media rights revenue. So they called it NFL Europe. And what they did was, instead of having teams in the United States playing against teams in Europe, they said, we're just going to make European teams, or just have European teams. And so reason for the rebranding is, one, rivalries. They thought that if they had a European circuit, they would create natural rivalries, which is similar to those that are seen in soccer. So they tried to take the cultural aspect of European sport and apply it to sport. They really tried to have as little or no influence from America as possible. So they had 3 European teams that were in the WLAF, which I believe were Barcelona. I just forgot them. Don't worry, I won't quiz you on them. But either way, they had the 3 teams that were in the World League of American Football, kept them, but added 3 additional teams. And those were in Amsterdam, Dusseldorf, and Edinburgh. Now remember, Frankfurt was another one that was in the WLAF. But either ways, they had 6 teams in the second round. And the goal was really to create a global affinity for the NFL brand. That's why they call it the NFL Europe. So they also did a couple things to try to make the game a little bit different. Changes to the game format. So they made a split season. They also included more international players. And in fact, they required that 7 of the players on each of the team had to be national players. In other words, had to be players from the country in which that team was located. And they were required to be active every single game. So you couldn't just get 7 random people from that nation and put them on the bench. They had to play actively in every game. So again, you had buy-in to their own citizens. So the question is, why did they add American players to these rosters? A lot of it comes back to team identification or team ID. We know through research that if a fan feels like they're more identified with the brand, they're going to be more likely to purchase the brand in the future, buy tickets and merchandise and so on and so forth. They also made some game changes, some rule changes. All of it was centered around the ability to try to make it more exciting. They made field goals, which I think is an interesting idea, by the way, that if the field goal was over 50 yards long, they got 4 points instead of 3. Be interesting to see if that changed in the NFL today. So 50-yard field goals or more or longer were 4 points. Receivers in this version only had to have 1 foot in bounds, so that was similar to college rules. In the NFL, you had to have 2. So if a receiver caught the ball, they had to have at least 1 foot down. And they changed the play clock to be quicker, so only 35 seconds on the play clock to get the game to go a little bit faster. And so looking at it, the NFL did a few other things. They changed the uniform design to be more exciting and European idea. Whether or not you think this is more dramatic or not, you could see these are the type of jerseys they had. They also had some other problems, so it failed again. The biggest problem was attendance. One of their biggest markets was in London, and again, because they have such a great influence on Americans in London, they thought, you know what, this is our biggest market. Even in the largest market, London had 10,500 fans on average. Teams were responsible for themselves financially, and they couldn't stay afloat. And so because of the low attendance, the teams were losing money. The NFL wasn't really helping them out. Reebok was actually a sponsor, which is another reason why they were able to bring in merchandise and media rights. Reebok signed a deal, and they walked away from their contract of $50 million a year, and so the NFL lost $100 million in total commitment in that first year. Now the silver lining is, even though it failed, you can see some of the well-known players that have come out of NFL Europe. John Kitna was in Barcelona in 1997. Jake Delhomme was in Amsterdam in 98, Frankfurt in 99, and Kirk Warner, who won the Super Bowl in 1998, was with Amsterdam. Okay, but you know what? The NFL said, we're going to try one more time, and we call this NFL Europa. So was the A enough, so to speak? Well, the answer is no. Spoiler alert. It started in 2006, but folded in 2008. They rebranded again, but this time they looked at their high-performing markets, the successful ones, and they kept their brand, essentially their teams, only in Germany and Holland, in Netherlands, essentially. They tried to use the logos to reflect the culture of Europe, so they tried to change a few of those things, but unfortunately it failed as well for a lot of the same reasons. The popularity wasn't there. Today, the NFL tries to do things to try to encourage participation. TV is still is old, but it's still relevant. NFL has, and deals with NBC, CBS, Fox, and ESPN. They have media rights deals in about $42 billion until 2021. And Super Bowl, which is one of the most watched sporting events globally, single sporting events globally, is still one of the highest rated in Europe as well. And so it's still popular. New media is occurring, so the second screen, so people watching television, but also their iPad to see the event. So electronics that are used during watching live sporting events. Social media has also changed the way that consumers globally can interact. NFL has 12 million followers on Twitter and Facebook. That's in 2013. And so a lot of it goes back to this idea of television and media. Other thing they try to do is grassroots efforts. They do clinics. So they hold an NFL/Wilson sponsored world partnership where they host coaching clinics across the globe to try to encourage this idea of education for youth and youth coaches. They hold events that would be games and championships abroad. They also have programs, so the punt, Pass and Kick program is a grassroots marketing program that they have tried to expand globally. And then in 2014, they opened offices in Beijing, China, Toronto, Canada, Mexico City, Mexico, London, and Tokyo. All of these to try to support the grassroots effort so they can build this mentality or this idea of understanding American football. And really what they're trying to do right now is their only method of expansion is exporting the games. In other words, having games or a series of games in other countries. In 1996, they had NFL International Series. And continues, they add a single game here and there. In Mexico, it worked. In 2005 was the first time they had over 100,000 people for an international football NFL game. It was between the 49ers and the Cardinals. This last year, there were some issues with Houston going to, I guess this was like a year or two ago now, to Mexico City. But they want to focus on London. This partially due because of the good relationship between the U.S. and the U.K., as well as the expatriates that are living there.